Welcome to the Confident Grief Coach Show.
Hi, I am Pat Shevland, founder of the Confident Grief Coach School.
And I'm Cami Thielander, Advanced Certified Grief Coach and founder of Embodied Grief Support Coaching.
We believe as professionals, it is important to have a forum where we can gather as a community to really talk about all things body, mind, and spirit when it comes to grief.
We will be sharing stories, discussing thought-provoking ideas, and interviewing others who work in the field of grief and those who have the lived experience of creating lives of peace and purpose after experiencing deep loss.
Information about Cami's Embodied Grief Support Coaching Services or the Confident Grief Coach Certification Program can be found in our show notes below.
Thank you for joining us at the Confident Grief Coach Show. And if you like what you're hearing or would like us to focus on a specific topic in the future, please hit the like and subscribe button to stay connected.
Hello, Cami.
Hello, Pat. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
What's on your mind?
Oh, today I thought it would be really cool to have a conversation about Irish wakes. I'm wearing my green, tapping into my Irish roots, so to speak. My grandmother was a McCaffrey, so she was a bit of a wee Irish lattice. No, what would she be? An Irish
Laddie? I don't know.
lassie, a wee
Oh,
Irish lassie, I bet, huh? I don't know.
I'm not Irish. I have no clue.
Yeah, but anyway, I just started thinking because just not like a few days ago or whatever, someone gets, people call me and I do interviews with them and they're exploring the Confident Grief Coach certification program. And as we start talking, it seems inevitably that they bring up, oh, we just don't do grief really well in the United States or in Canada or wherever. But typically it's like we believe collectively, from what I'm seeing, most people believe we just don't do grief very well in the US. And so I will oftentimes challenge them a little bit because I've talked to people throughout the world. And one of the questions that I always ask is, so how do you even, what are your ceremonies or what are your cultural pieces that you bring in when a loved one dies? Because there are different, some people might do a full year, or the Jewish tradition, they may go for a couple of years. In the Hmong, I've spoken with people from the Hmong culture, and they will do a ritual that goes on for months and into a year or longer. Um, Native Americans have their 4-day wake with the wiping of the tears ceremony. And then I started thinking about Irish wakes. So I
Yeah,
thought that would be a fun conversation. I even have my phone up with I was Googling Irish wakes and kind of the history of it.
I love that. I think it's important because, we think about like in our culture, I was trying to think about like, well, what is it that we even do for our ceremonies and honoring practices? And it's like, besides, the funeral, like what else is there? There's really not. We just skip over it, right? We're like, well, you get 3 days of bereavement and then you got to be back to work and doing all the things. So it's like we really don't do it well. So I think I love thinking about all of these opportunities and ways that, traditionally or culturally, like other people incorporate this into their practice. So yeah, tell me a little bit about Irish wakes and what that is all about because I'm curious.
Well, this is like an interesting one. Back in the day, the Irish Wake was a celebration by the life of the deceased full of uniquely Irish customs. And so it can be songs and um, it's what they say is it's anything but a somber affair. Merrymaking was a common part of the traditional Irish wake and a major part of the grieving process in Ireland. They felt that it was a pagan ritual that was more rooted, much of the goings on at an Irish wake, and much of the carrying on was frowned upon by the church, which they don't do quite the Irish wakes like they used to. And I kind of wonder how much of that was just culturally with the church and that type of thing. Storytelling, mischief making, and games were all part of the send off in an attempt to ease the suffering of the deceased family. So it was likely had its roots. This is what this one's saying. This is from a place called irishcentral.com. Likely has its roots in the ancient Jewish custom of leaving the burial chamber unsealed for 3 days, with the relatives returning during that time to check for any signs of life, because there was some story about that, that when they drank stout from pewter tankards, the drinkers could have some lead poisoning that put them in a catatonic state. And so then they wanted to leave it open just so that they could check to make sure that the dude was really dead, or the gal, from drinking their Irish brew, and they weren't just in a catatonic state from the lead
Wow.
poisoning. So that's kind of a story. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's interesting. The wake gives family and friends one last opportunity, which we know, to remember the life of the person they've lost before the burial, and in an attempt to, what it says, to offer some kind of solace in the face of their loss. And I found this just really interesting because I am a certified celebrant. And one of my best things that I love to do in life is to help the family create a ceremony, a service, a celebration, that brings in merriment and also honors the sadness and the grief. So it really is like coalescing the whole thing. But it's an hour. I mean, seriously, if that, maybe 40 minutes. And then what? And it's kind of like, then what? And so they made the Irish wakes were long. They are the ones that they would hire, female keeners were often hired by the family, and they wailed and cried and recited poetry, lamenting the loss of the loved ones. So they were the ones that were physically expressing it, and the crying. And then they were mourners, they were wailers,
Mm.
hired wailers to wail for this. And then they had all these traditions and all of this stuff, and it went on for quite a while. And as I was reading this, I was thinking about when our nephew died, um, Native American, and they did a traditional Native American funeral, I guess, wake is what they would call it, where they laid him out in the teepee on a, I don't know the name of it, but kind of like this pedestal, kind of handmade bed, gurney, not a gurney, but something, up on that. He was dressed in his dancing garb. And then they had tables. The teepees are huge, had these long, like luncheon tables, like you would see in cafeterias, lining the teepee, and people would bring, there's a bowl to throw in cigarettes, there was cakes, there was food, and the people that were there weren't eating it. It was to send off Colton, right? Coleman into the spirit in the sky, so to speak. And so
Sure.
that was very interesting. And they never left the body unattended. And that's what happened with these Irish wakes way back in the day, is they didn't leave the deceased unattended. They were in the home. And I remember my mom talking about that in the home she grew up in. They laid them out in the parlor, and then people would come. And so that family member was with the family for days until they actually went and had the actual funeral and the burial.
Yeah, wow. How different is that based on how we do things in the States?
Yeah. And I think, when I think about, like, with Coleman's wake and funeral, it just made such an impression on us because none of us had participated in that. He was the first time that we had been exposed to it in the family. And they would have the drummers come, and the drummers would come at dusk, and they would drum for hours and hours and hours, and people would just come and go inside the teepee, or we'd just go sit, and you would just sit, and maybe you sat in silence or sat with the drummers, or you had conversations. The yard was filled with people at all the time, and in the house, and people were bringing food. And then at the end of that 4 days, where he was never left unattended, then we had the wiping of the tears ceremony, and the wiping of the tears. Everybody in the community came. It was in the high school. They all lined up sat down in the bleachers. They had all of us, the family members, sitting in chairs in the middle of the gymnasium floor. So we were surrounded by the whole tribal community. We were all sitting, in chairs on the floor. And then they did the ceremony, the wiping of the tears ceremony. And part of that was sharing a cigarette, which was hard for me because I'd quit smoking, so I couldn't inhale. But but we all, that cigarette went through every person. That was a symbol. And then the chanting and speaking in the language, and really it really was about, the whole idea is wiping away the tears on our earthly faces to not tether that soul, that spirit, to the earth with our tears, but to allow him to then go. And then every person in that gymnasium came down one by one and bowed or shook every one of our hands. So there was like such a poignant, personal, the respect and the honor was just so amazing. And then he was buried at the Indian Mound. So yeah, but it still was only 4 days.
Right. Yeah. Only 4 days compared to the rest of your life without this person, compared to the life that they lived leading up to it. Yet 4 full days of honoring and celebrating and grieving and openly crying and having the conversations and all of this ceremony, when, that doesn't seem like very long. And then you think about in the States, it's like, how long do we actually give? Like you said, an hour, 40 minutes maybe, to do this kind of stuff. And then, especially if someone dies, like, in hospice, or at home even, or in a hospital, it's like they're gone, take them away. It's like there's not much of a chance to say goodbye, or to tell stories, or to even just hold the space to cry and wail and mourn. It's like we just kind of skip over that really quickly, and just to get back to things and to move on really quick. So it's curious how it's like, you get 4 full days of this wake and this ceremony, yet still, like, that's nothing compared to the impact that this person had, and the whole rest of your life that you're going to
Mm.
have now without them.
Right. But there is something about that immersion. I think that's why for our family, it was just so, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, we all walked away, the kids walked away, and it was like, wow, this was like something we will never forget. And there was a beauty to it because it was 24/7, where typically, I'm speaking for myself and my own, you have a celebration of life, but that's kind of that gathering for, even if it's for a few hours. For my brother, we had a celebration. We gathered all of his friends and our family and everything at a local pub, and played blues music the whole time, and had people brought in food. And so we were able to spend a lot of time together, many hours together, which felt good. But the bottom line is, once you leave that door, it's like, okay, now what? It was a beautiful celebration of life that way. And I just keep thinking, as grief coaches, you know, the importance of us helping our clients and supporting our community and the various cultures that we serve, to think about how they can continue that celebration of life and honoring of their grief and their loved one.
Navigating that now what space.
Yeah.
Okay, even if you did take, 4 full days to hold this space, or a few hours at a pub, or whatever that ritual looks like, it's like, okay, well, now we're still going into this whole life now without them. And then what does that look like? How do we want that to continue on?
Yeah. It was funny because I talk about the Hmong, and Vietnamese, and I was having someone do my nails once, and we were just talking about death and dying. And I said, so what's your belief when someone dies? Like, trying to just be curious. Oh, they're still here. They're standing right next to us right here. And then she told about when her mother died that she lights incense. And first it was like almost every day, then it went to once a week, then it went to once a month, then it went to, the year, but they actually set a place at the table purposely for her mother. So, and that wasn't something like just a one and done. That went on for probably a good year or so, that you always had that respect and that honor of that person's spirit, energy, essence were still a big part of the family. So they purposely did that to honor. And we talk about that maybe like at a holiday or an anniversary, but wow, what would it be like if we integrated something like that regularly?
Yeah, I'm thinking about some of the pressure that, grieving people get from the people in their lives, from culture, about like they feel like they're not allowed to talk about their person anymore. I hear from so many people, it's like, wow, thank you for asking me. Nobody asks me anymore, like how I'm doing, or asks about my person and what their name was and what their life was like. It's like that permission after the funeral just kind of goes away. And it's like you're just expected to not speak about them again. It's like they're gone, like get over it. And I think about that, how that really is so impactful on someone to feel like, of course you're still carrying their energy and they're still with you non-physically, energetically, you're still carrying them. How can we do that in a way that's intentional and can honor their memory rather than just like dismissing their existence like our culture tends to do, where it's like, get over it, stop talking about them, we don't want to hear it anymore. And it breaks my heart to hear that people really do receive that message. And that just like, ooh, how can we start to shift that and talk about this, having these conversations and just educating that, there very much is an opportunity, even if, holidays are a great place to start, but
Yep.
then, every day, how can we carry them with in a way that feels good to remember them and connect with them and honor them?
Yep. I know several people that I've worked with, they'll actually like long term, every year on the birthday, they actually will throw a birthday celebration for their loved one. So they do the cake and the balloons and all of that. And as a family, they gather together. And I really like that because even families, especially as the children get to be adults and get on with their own lives and, but to actually gather together and honor that. Like after my mom died, my brother has a lake property, and she died in January, and then her only sister died in March. So we decided in July for my mom's birthday, which was also my oldest brother's birthday, that we would gather. And we did that first one as like a celebration of life kind of thing. We didn't do anything formal, but it was like gathering the two families together, my aunts and our family together, to just really reminisce. And now we've done it every single year. And it was so important because we did that first one, and it was my mom and my oldest brother shared a birthday. She had her first kid, on her 25th birthday. And then that November, he died. And so then for us coming back again the year after that, and then this year, and for us to be able to gather as a family and have stories, or, oh, that little one reminds me of your mom, or, gosh, remember this? And we are able to tell the stories and remember the people that we love. And we do it on a regular basis, and it's bringing in the whole family.
Yeah, the gathering and giving that permission to really get into the stories and share the memories. And I like what you said about bringing the merriment into it, like make it a celebration, throw a birthday party. Like it doesn't have to be that you all sit in a circle and cry for an hour. Like, it gets to be fun, and to honor all of those moments that you shared with your person that you really do want to remember and keep alive. And it doesn't have to be, yeah, there's going to be grief and sadness, I'm sure, about, all of the memories and how much you really miss them and wanting them to be here, and all of that gets that space as well. But gathering to cultivate that sense of that celebration and make it kind of like a party, I really like that idea.
Yep. And I think celebration of lives are like starting to get that shift from funerals. Funerals in growing up, I grew up Catholic, and you had to work the dark clothes and they were somber, and just the energy of walking behind the casket as it was wheeled up to the front of the church, and placed by the altar, and all of us in a processional, and it was just so somber.
Mhm.
And almost kind of when I think about it, it was really dark. I mean, my first experience of that was when I was 9 when my grandpa died. And I'm like, wow, when you look at that. So, I mean, I think that merriment that they talked about in the Irish wake, all of a sudden the church started saying, no, that's not cool. We don't want to be, going off and having too much fun here. This is a sadness. And so it's almost like, yes, there is sadness in our grieving, and you and I talk about that all the time. The feelings are real, and we don't want to dismiss that, but also those other feelings of happiness and the memories and the funny stories, the giggling and just reminiscing about that are just so important, and giving each other crap. Like I remember when my grandpa died, my other grandpa, um, I was at the bar with my brothers. It was like after the wake or whatever. And we just started talking. And my one brother goes, yeah, and all I got from Grandpa Schmidt was his hairdo. Well, because he had a receding hairline, and my other brothers had long hair. I mean, this is in the 70s, long hair and all of that. And we just laughed and laughed. And none of us have forgotten that little comment about, because we laughed so hard as a family. But that was the fun of it, right? Just enjoying our time and creating new memories out of, this. But I do think celebration of lives. I mean, I know when I'm the celebrant, I am looking for how I can bring joy and levity in addition to that real honoring and touching upon that grief and that sadness. So I purposely weave into the eulogy and weave into the service the both ands. Some humor, some fun, but also it's okay. And I guess I would say that I try to tap into the tears a little bit. I want people to feel. I want people to feel and feel it and feel those emotions, the happy and the sad within that 40 minutes that we have together, so that they can walk out the door and say, wow, this was a decent step on my first step in my grief journey.
Yeah, permission for all of that, permission for the sadness and the wailing and the grief and that expression of the sadness about this person's death, while also giving permission for the laughter and the joy and the happiness and the fullness of their life that they got to live and the impact that they made. And I think I love what you said about both and having space for both of that, because I also hear from people where they feel like they're not allowed to have the happiness. Like they're not allowed, they feel a sense of relief after their person dies because they're not suffering anymore or whatever it might be. And then it's like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I'm not allowed to be happy. So I think reframing that from that maybe traditional, maybe it comes from Christianity, that somber, like you're supposed to be sad and how dare you be happy after they've passed. I think reframing that and just like no matter what you're feeling, whether it's tears or laughter or joy or sadness, like all of it gets to have its space here. And especially during that celebration of life or the wake, like I love that that's just an invitation and setting up that energy for the rest of your grief process moving forward. It's okay if you have those moments of happiness and laughter and joy and the sadness, like all of that gets to exist. And it starts here in this gathering, in this community space.
So what I heard today, I mean, there's a couple of words that you kept saying which just resonate. Permission, granting the permission to yourself if you're the griever to be able to grieve, granting the permission to have levity, granting the permission to celebrate, or not, if that's what you're not feeling, granting the permission. And for the people who are supporting the grievers, helping the grievers be able to gain that permission to make them feel okay about that.
Yeah.
And then, oh, I just lost the other one. but it was something to do with creating and just, making sure that you allow that creation of that to occur so that you can have the both and. But the permission thing is just like huge. That's a huge piece that I had never thought about, but permission in grief, granting the permission to ourselves and to others when they are in the midst of this is just like, I guess that was my big pearl and takeaway today.
That's powerful. And I love that we can intentionally create that time and space through celebrations, through ceremony, through rituals, through wakes, through whatever it is that is your space to gather and have that opportunity to do this. Rather than just skipping over it and pretending like it's not a thing or pretending like we just need to move on. Like, yeah, giving that permission through that act of gathering and in ceremony as well. I think both go hand in hand and yeah, can really make a big impact on the grieving people as they go forward into the now what.
And the word came to me, invitation. You use the term invitation. And so this is what I would say as we leave this conversation. I am inviting everybody who is grieving actively or anyone who has experienced a deep loss. Think about how might you be able to put on your green next week, maybe, and even use that as a stepping point to, I want to celebrate. I want to create a celebration where I bring in my loved ones and giving myself permission to feel all the feels, but also inviting others to come and join in the celebration and the honoring of the people that you love.
That's beautiful. That's powerful.
There we go. So I'll wear my green on St. Patty's Day and bring in all of my peeps and figure out how to celebrate them because I had never thought about that before.
I love that. Now I'm curious about Irish wakes and how I can tap into a little bit of that energy and put on some green and lean into that as well and just normalize that conversation and that ceremony, that act of celebration. That's
Yeah.
a piece of the grieving process that I think can be normalized more, the happy and the celebration and the merriment that gets to come with the sadness as well. So thanks for in creating a space for an invitation and that permission to have all the feelings and for this beautiful conversation. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, we will talk to you next week. And in the meantime, go grab your green. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.